be lacking in self-esteem is to be in a very dire situation, much like being up shit creek without a paddle. Maintaining self-esteem is like keeping a bank account. Make too many withdrawals and not enough deposits, and you soon deplete it. Low or non-existent self-esteem can and often does lead one to making poor choices in life, which in turn can set off a chain of disastrous consequences. In failing to address the core issues that have undermined and eroded self-esteem and a sense of worthiness, one can expect nothing more but more of the same negative and destructive experiences, as was the case of many who have already passed before us. Charlotte Dawson, an Australian TV celebrity, suicided at age 47 in February 2014. Prior to her death, Charlotte had publicly admitted to suffering depression for over a decade, which she connected to the abortion she'd had 15 years earlier. In 1999, Charlotte married Olympic swimmer Scott Miller, 1 year prior to the Summer Olympics being held in Sydney. Soon after the marriage, Charlotte was pregnant with her first and, as it turns out, only child she ever conceived. She wrote in her autobiography, Scott was not supportive of the pregnancy because the due date clashed with the Olympics. The Olympics was Scott's #1 priority, and nothing would stand in his way. So it was decided that Charlotte would terminate the pregnancy. Inside, I was in total turmoil, Charlotte wrote. I wanted the baby. How long would we have to wait? There was no guarantees that I would fall pregnant again. Things went from bad to worse for Charlotte when her husband refused to stay with her at the abortion clinic. He couldn't cope with the atmosphere and left her there alone. Charlotte revealed that she had been adopted at birth and sexually abused as a child. Her sacrifice of her only pregnancy for the sake of her husband's Olympic career failed dismally. Sex tapes emerged around this time of Miller being filmed committing adultery with a female swimmer. He was also caught on tape doping to enhance his performance. Consequently, Scott failed to make the team for the Olympics. Dawson was heartbroken and shattered. She wrote, If I'd started to feel pangs of depression after the termination, the shock of receiving this news barely 6 months into my marriage was too much to bear. Something inside me completely broke that Sunday, something that is beyond repair, something that has never come back. I was a broken mess. I had to pretend that nothing was wrong at work and at social functions while people were whispering behind my back. It was around this time that I learned the gentle art of drowning my sorrows with bucket loads of wine. In observing with deeper insight into the human condition and in having the ability to discern in an objective capacity, we clearly see the links, join the dots, and connect Charlotte's whole story to her compromised self-esteem. Charlotte's attempts to conceal and suppress her pain and trauma through medicating herself with alcohol, a depressant and extremely unhealthy means to coping, only perpetuated her existing depression, further undermined her self-esteem and sense of worth, and in turn ended in the horrific and tragic taking of her own life. Regardless of the circumstances and events that made up the theme of Charlotte's story, the underlying and most often untold version of the story is experienced in countless ways the world over, and rarely is the root cause that leads to the traumatic effects ever identified that alone acknowledged, addressed, and healed. As a result, we live in a world full of very traumatized and untreated sick people who only continue to add insult to injury through destructive patterns of behavior and making irrational choices. Einstein's definition of insanity: doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. Stand naked in front of the mirror. Do you approve of what you see and of who you are inside and out? Can you do it? Can you tell yourself, I love you, without hesitation, cringing, kidding yourself, criticizing, nitpicking, or feeling incredibly uncomfortable? The point of the exercise is not about egotistic vanity or perfection. It is about loving yourself regardless of your flaws and seeing more qualities than flaws. It is about loving who you are on a much deeper than physical level. If you cannot love, honour, value, and approve of yourself just as you are, how can you expect anybody else to? To be void or to have low self-esteem and self-worth is to have little or a total lack of self-love, respect, honour, value, confidence, self-control, and a host of other positive and vitally important qualities. Without high levels of self-esteem, one can only ever expect to find themselves engaged in a constant battle with life, other people, and most of all with the self. For it is self-esteem that is the foundation of your entire well-being, spirit and energy. Self-loathing is by contrast the opposite extreme of self-esteem and one's greatest enemy. Self-loathing is one of the main underlying psychological conditions that causes people to attempt to abdicate their own personal responsibility to exercise conscience and fall into patterns of following negative examples and justifying destructive habits and patterns. Just as it is not possible for a follower to truly be exercising conscience, it is not possible for a follower to truly love themselves. Self-loathing is created when an earlier trauma has been suppressed and buried into the subconscious mind, instead of being confronted, dealt with, and healed. This in turn can lead to feelings of inadequacy. Conscience is indeed linked to your self-esteem, together with your thoughts, feelings, emotions, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviour. Unless you were born a psychopath lacking conscience, it acts as the ultimate filter and deciphers whether or not a deposit is made into your self-esteem account or withdrawn. Whilst the statistics of born psychopaths is said to be quite a low percentage of the population, the number of secondary psychopaths, sociopaths and narcissists is much higher and on the rise. These people were born with their conscience intact, but it can be and is programmed out of the conscious of humanity through sinister mind control techniques and conditioning. The programming and conditioning may begin at birth if a child has a psychopath or narcissist parent. Though not all of these offspring will take on the traits of the parent, some will take the opposite route. However, in taking the opposite route, these people will have a victim mentality ingrained and will more than likely continue to attract psychopaths, sociopaths and narcissists into his or her life unless the pattern is broken and healed. Most are programmed and conditioned into psychopathic and narcissistic behaviour through the influences of TV. It's called programming for a reason. Media, including social media, entertainment, New Age religion, books, social and peer pressure, and the general culture of a society. Psychopaths are not actually clinically insane. They can actually be highly intelligent on an intellectual level. However, wisdom, rationale, common sense, logic, feeling, and emotional intelligence are all lacking in these individuals, though they can be very good at mimicking and feigning these attributes. Ruthless and cunning psychopaths are also well skilled in manipulation and influencing others to become just like them. In fact, millions, if not billions, of others are influenced by psychopaths because psychopaths most often tend to hold all of the important positions of power and leadership in government, religion, media, medicine, finance, science, entertainment, and law enforcement. Indeed, all human welfare and environmental interests and organisations. Contrary to popular belief, psychopaths are not all destined for prison and mental asylums. A good majority of them are very much in the public eye, have been for years, and continue to be free to carry out their worst evil acts and destructions outside the confines of barbed wire and brick walls, and often they do this in plain sight. Also, contrary to popular belief, psychopaths don't necessarily look like the loony down the street or the vision that is conjured up in one's mind of an axe murderer. It is actually more apt to liken a psychopath to the one you would least suspect of a heinous crime, or the vampires depicted in the movies, charming, handsome, and alluring. The conscience plays a very important and significant role in the level of one's self-esteem because if and when you ignore or repress your conscience, which is very much a guiding force in your life to be reckoned with, you will inadvertently undermine your self-esteem and self-worth. Furthermore, your conscience is linked to the highest law that governs humanity and nature itself. This law is known as universal or natural law. Common law, constitutional law, and even the Ten Commandments of the Bible were written upon natural law. There exists many separate laws within natural law that rules over and governs creation, such as gravity, karma, attraction, free will, and the cycles of life. In further defining what natural law is, consider this: do no harm. Any act carried out against the well-being, health, life, or property of another, or inflicted even against oneself, is subject to the natural law of consequence. Unfortunately, and all too often as children, we either didn't learn about consequences at all, or were taught it through harmful and destructive means like being beaten, cursed, yelled at, humiliated, and berated. Few parents think of the consequences of treating children in such a manner, and how they undermine the self-esteem and worth of a child, and how this barbaric behaviour in turn teaches and influences kids to either grow up to do exactly the same thing to their own children, or otherwise do the exact opposite and raise unruly kids who have little if no concept of consequences. Your kids are a barometer of you. If there is any inconsistency or imbalances in your own behaviour, beliefs and attitudes, children will react to it.